Disclaimer: the following video is for educational and research purposes and should be regarded as educational entertainment. It in no way glorifies the actions that take place in this video. In case the video you're about to watch may trigger PTSD or affect your mental well-being, feel free to exit the video and protect your peace. From yours truly, Inspector Truman. Hello ladies and gentlemen, hope you had an amazing Halloween just as we did. Thank you so much for tuning into today's video. And without further ado, I would like to welcome you to the official Truman Inc. Halloween special. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Our first story is that of Yoshihiro Hattori, a Japanese exchange student who was shot in cold blood on October 17, 1992 for going to the wrong house for a party in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. This is that story. Yoshihiro Hattori was 16 years old when he got an opportunity to visit the United States of America for a year through the American Field Service, which is a worldwide youth exchange program.
What if your family had a new teenager in the house? New brother or sister from another part of the world? It's possible if you host an American Field Service exchange student.
In August of 1992, he arrived in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. His host parents were none other than Richard and Holly Haymaker, who were a college professor and a physician respectively, and their teenage son, Webb Haymaker. 2 months into their stay in Louisiana, on the 17th of October 1992, Webb and Yoshi were invited to a Halloween costume party for other exchange students. During his stay in America, Yoshi had been watching a lot of John Travolta movies, and so he decided to dress up as Tony from the movie Saturday Night Fever. So he rented a tuxedo and wore a ruffled white shirt and black pants and armed himself with his trusty black camera so he could take some pictures during the party. Webb Haymaker, on the other hand, decided to dress up as an accident victim because he had a neck brace from a diving accident, so he added some bandages to add to his costume. At exactly 8 p.m., Webb and Yoshi arrived at East Baton Rouge Parish where the party was being held. However, the two had the wrong address and found themselves at the residence of 30-year-old supermarket butcher Rodney Pierce and his wife, Bonnie Pierce. Due to the similarity of the address of Rodney's house and the house where they were supposed to go, and the presence of Halloween decorations outside of Rodney's house, they believed they were at the right place. However, the right house was just 5 doors away. The pair walked up to the house and rang the doorbell, but nobody answered. However, Bonnie Pierce later opens the door leading to the carport, and seeing Webb standing a few feet away, she said that initially she thought that Webb needed help on account of his neck brace and his bandages. She then saw Yoshi running towards her. Bonnie then slams the door as Webb tried to communicate with her. She then ran into the house and tells her husband to get his gun. Due to Bonnie slamming the door shut, Webb figured they were at the wrong house and the two started walking away. It was at this moment that Rodney Pierce appeared from the side door. In his hand was a .45 Magnum handgun with an 8-inch barrel and a scope. Yoshi saw Rodney and started moving back as he thought they were at the right house. He was moving at a fast pace saying, "We're here for the party, we're here for the party." However, he didn't see that Rodney had a gun, but Webb did, and started to scream at Yoshi, "Yoshi, no! Yoshi, no! Come back, Yoshi!" Rodney saw the 16-year-old moving in his direction. He pointed his gun at him and told him to freeze. However, due to the language barrier, Yoshi couldn't understand and kept on moving forward, telling him, "We're here for the party," waving his arms with his camera in his hand, and with no hesitation, Rodney Pierce shot him in his chest. Rodney would slam the door shut after that, and Bonnie, his wife, would call the police. Webb would go next door for help, and when they both came back to the house, Yoshi was on his back, severely wounded. The police arrived 40 minutes after they were called, and Rodney and Bonnie never left their house once the whole time to help. When a neighbor called upon them for help, Bonnie yelled, "Go away!" When first responders arrived, Yoshi died in the ambulance. Rodney Pierce was not charged as the police determined that Yoshi was trespassing and his movements towards Rodney made him fear for his life. Later, Rodney was tried and found not guilty for manslaughter. Yoshi's family then sued Rodney, and they were awarded a sum of $100,000 by Rodney's insurance. Rodney would lose his job at the supermarket and his house and end up living in a trailer park. Our second story takes place in the state of Ohio and is known as the Liske family murder. On Sunday, the 31st of October 2010, a young boy by the name of Devin Griffin comes home to find his entire family dead. This is that story. Susan and William Liske met at a waste management plant in Ohio where they both worked, and in 2001 they would get married. The two had children from previous relationships, where William Liske had a son known as BJ Liske, and Susan had two boys, Devin Griffin and Derek Griffin. Our focus today will be on BJ Liske, William's son. Growing up, BJ was a very troubled and angry child who got into fights and bullied other children. However, his father thought of it as a phase that BJ would grow out of. Once William and Susan got married in 2001, BJ was against it and hated Susan and her children. He hated the fact that she was coming into his home and enforcing her rules. BJ would go as far as to threaten to harm himself, prompting his father to call the police. From this point moving forward, BJ would only get worse. On one occasion, BJ would get into an argument with Susan and strike her hard in the chest. 2 months after that, another argument would ensue, and BJ would strike Susan in the head with a coffee mug and steal her car. Susan would press charges, but BJ would be deemed mentally unfit for trial and would be diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. His father would remove him from the house and put him in a group home for mental health patients. In 2004, after BJ came back from his treatment, something very disturbing would occur at the Liske residence. While Susan was taking a shower, BJ would enter the bathroom and attack her. Susan would fight him off, but now she was scared for her life in her own home. After his father heard about this incident, he had no choice but to kick him out. The fact that he was 18 meant he was of legal age to take care of himself. The wedge between William and his son grew wider, and although BJ lived close enough to his father's house where he would visit sometimes, the craziness never stopped. A few months would pass and nothing would change. BJ would get treatment for his condition, and his therapist would deem him a danger to himself and others. In 2007, BJ was hospitalized so he could get proper treatment, but his father William still wanted the best for his son. And so, to get him out of the hospital, he would apply for guardianship for his adult son and successfully got him out of the hospital into a halfway house. But this would put a strain on the family, but they had no choice but to bear with it. BJ was not pleasant to be around. He always made people nervous and uneasy. Surprisingly, neighbors' pets would start to disappear one at a time. However, no one accused him of this act. In his father's eyes, it looked like BJ was getting better, and all he needed was a bit more time. However, in the background, just like James Holmes, who we covered not too long ago, he was getting worse, and everyone would find out soon enough. On October 31st, 2010, on Halloween, 16-year-old Devin Griffin would get back from a sleepover from his biological father's house. He gets to his room and quickly changes his clothes as he was scheduled to sing that Sunday at his church choir. When he got downstairs, he bumped into BJ, who asked him various questions like where he was going, how he was getting there, and how long he would be away. This rubbed Devin the wrong way, as BJ was very quiet and kept to himself most of the time. However, he gave BJ a response and went about his day. After church, Devin would get home in the early afternoon to a quiet house, and BJ was nowhere to be found. Devin would proceed to his room and unwind with a session of video games. As darkness fell, Devin would remove his headset and go downstairs for a drink. That was when his suspicions grew. He noticed the dead quiet state of the house. He then decided to go to his parents' room to check for their presence. He opened the door to find they were still in bed, but something was off. His mother's leg poked out of the comforter. When he called her, she didn't respond. He slowly pulled the comforter and saw what seemed to be blood all over. Surely he thought it was a Halloween prank, but after his mother was in an unresponsive state and the smell of copper, reality quickly set in. Devin would scream and run out of the house. Devin would later call his Aunt Lori, who rushed to the Liske residence to comfort her nephew. Once the authorities arrived, they found the situation to be much, much worse. Upon peeling back the covers, they found both William and Susan dead, where William was shot in the face several times and Susan was also shot 3 times in the head. The police would later make their way into Derek Griffin's room, and to their surprise, he was also dead in his bed. He had suffered blunt force trauma to the head. It was then determined that Derek was the first to die, and then his stepfather, and finally Susan. The police report stated that everyone was dead by the time Devin came home to change to go to church. One question arose: where was BJ? Devin had spoken to him before he left, according to the police. This was after the murders were committed. The family F-150 truck was also gone, and during Lori's 911 call, he stated that BJ had been threatening Susan for a while, so he became the #1 suspect. The police ended up finding him at their family cabin in Carroll County. BJ would go on trial, and he would plead not guilty, but due to the state of Ohio having the death penalty, he quickly changed his plea to guilty on the count that he wasn't given the death penalty. He was later given 3 consecutive life sentences. In March of 2015, BJ was found dead in his cell from a self-inflicted wound. For our third story, one of the biggest fears parents have on Halloween, besides their children getting kidnapped, is their children consuming tainted candy. However, on the 31st of October 1974, this would become a reality. This is that story. Ronald Clark O'Brien and his family lived in Deer County, just outside of Houston, Texas. Him and his wife Deneen O'Brien had 2 children, Timothy, who was 8 years old, and Elizabeth, who was 5 years old. Ronald worked as an optician and lived what most people would consider a normal life. He was a deacon at a Second Baptist church where he sang in the choir and ran a local bus program. However, even if his job gave him a nice salary, he was in huge debt. So he went ahead and increased his children's life insurance. If anything was to happen to his children, he would get a settlement of $40,000 each. On October 31st, 1974, Ronald, his son, his daughter, and a neighbor with his child were out trick-or-treating in Pasadena, Texas. When they got to a certain house and rang the doorbell, no one answered. They all proceeded to move on to the next house. However, Ronald remained behind to wait. Suddenly, he appeared behind the rest of the group with 5 21-inch pixie sticks. For those who don't know what pixie sticks are, they're basically powdered candy wrapped in plastic tubing that resembles a straw. Ronald claimed that someone opened the door and handed him the candy. Ronald distributed the candy to his children and his neighbor's son. He gave his neighbor an extra stick to give to his other child who never came with him. The last stick was given to a child they encountered on their way home. Ronald knew the boy from church. When Ronald got home, he told Timothy and Elizabeth they could each have 1 piece of candy of their choosing before bed. Timothy ended up choosing the pixie stick his father gave him. Timothy had trouble getting the powdered candy out of the straw, so O'Brien helped him loosen the powder. After tasting the candy, Timothy complained that it tasted bitter. O'Brien then gave his son some Kool-Aid to wash the taste away. Timothy immediately began complaining that his stomach hurt and ran to the bathroom where he began vomiting and convulsing. Ronald later claimed that he held Timothy while he was vomiting and the child went limp in his arms. Timothy O'Brien died on his way to the hospital less than an hour after consuming the candy. It was later discovered that Timothy had ingested large quantities of cyanide. The community was at a frenzy as parents thought their children had ingested tainted candy. The police confiscated all the candy from the area and all of it was tested to see if any of it was contaminated. Everything came back negative apart from the 5 pixie sticks that Ronald had given out. By God's grace, none of the other children had eaten the candy. Ronald initially told police that he could not remember which house he got the pixie sticks from. Police became suspicious because Ronald and his neighbor had only taken their children to homes on 2 streets because it had been raining. Their suspicions increased after learning that none of the homes they visited had given out pixie sticks. After walking through the neighborhood with the police 3 times, Ronald led them to the home where no one answered the door. Ronald claimed that he went back there before catching up with the group. He said the owner of the home did not turn on the lights, but did crack the door open and handed him 5 pixie sticks. He claimed to have only seen the man's arm, which he described as hairy. The home was owned by Courtney Melvin. Melvin was an air traffic controller at William P. Airport and did not get home until 11 p.m. on Halloween night. Police ruled out Melvin as a suspect when over 200 people confirmed that he had been at work. As investigations proceeded, police learned that Ronald O'Brien was over $100,000 in debt, and he had a history of being unable to hold down a job. In the 10 years preceding the crime, O'Brien had held 21 jobs. At the time of his arrest, he was suspected of theft at his job at Texas State Optical and was close to being fired. His car was about to be repossessed, he had defaulted on several bank loans, and the family house was being foreclosed on. Police discovered that O'Brien had taken out a life insurance policy on his children in the months preceding Timothy's death. In January 1974, he had taken out $10,000 worth of life insurance policy on both his children. 1 month before Timothy's death, O'Brien took out an additional $20,000 policy on both his children, despite the objections of his life insurance agency. In the days preceding Timothy's death, O'Brien took yet another $20,000 policy on each child. The various policies totaled to approximately $60,000. O'Brien's wife maintained that she didn't know anything about the insurance policies on her children's lives. Police also learned that on the morning after Timothy's death, O'Brien had called his insurance company to inquire about collecting the policy he had taken out on his son. After learning that O'Brien had visited a chemical supply store in Houston to buy cyanide shortly before Halloween in 1974, where he left without purchasing anything after learning the smallest amount available to purchase was 5 pounds, the police began to suspect that Ronald O'Brien had laced the candies with poison in an effort to kill his children to collect on their life insurance policies. They believed that he gave the other children poisoned candy to cover up his crime. Police repeatedly questioned O'Brien, but he maintained his innocence. People would come forward with tidbits of information about Ronald's behavior before the murder. One of his customers at his workplace was a chemical salesman, and he remembered Ronald asking him about different poisons, including cyanide, and at one point asked him how much would kill a person and where he could buy some. Co-workers said that he bragged that his financial situation was about to change. A pocket knife was also found in his home with traces of powdered candy. He was also overheard on the day of his son's funeral saying that he would use the money from the life insurance policy to go on vacation. Police were certain that Ronald O'Brien had murdered his own son for financial gain. 6 days after the murder, Ronald O'Brien was arrested and he was charged with Capital One murder and 4 counts of attempted murder. When the media got wind of what Ronald had done, they dubbed him the Candyman. O'Brien maintained his innocence and pleaded not guilty till he was executed by lethal injection.
Cindy Song, aka Bunny Girl. It is common for children or adults to get kidnapped on Halloween. However, what is not common is for them to disappear into thin air without a trace. This is that story.
Cindy Song was born in South Korea. In the mid-90s, Cindy moved to Virginia to live with her aunt and uncle to attend school in America. She was accepted into Pennsylvania State University after high school, where she majored in integrative arts, a course that combined engineering, communications, and science. She was in her senior year in 2001 and would be graduating in the spring of the following year. Cindy worked 2 part-time jobs between classes. The degree she was studying was a student design program where she created her own curriculum. And combining that she had multiple jobs, Cindy was disciplined and focused on the goal of graduating. On the 31st of October, Cindy decided to have a night off from her studies and celebrate the holiday. Cindy and her friends, Stacy Pike and Lisa Kim, were set to attend a costume party at Players Nightclub on College Avenue. Dressed as a bunny in a white tennis skirt, bunny ears, and a tail, the trio stayed until 2 a.m. the following morning when they moved on to a friend's apartment to continue the party and play video games. Cindy was dropped off by her friends at 4 a.m. on Thursday the 1st of November outside the Park Apartments on Clinton Avenue, the place she called home. This was the last time they saw their friend, as from this point, Cindy Song disappeared. Cindy's roommate returned from visiting family later that day and wasn't concerned about Cindy not being home. The door was locked and nothing looked out of place. After 3 days, her friend became concerned about her lack of contact and called the police on the 4th of November. Cindy reached her apartment as her backpack that she had at the party was present. There was also a set of false eyelashes that she had worn with the bunny costume in her room, and her phone was still in her backpack. It is believed that Cindy went to a nearby 24-hour store in her costume after she had dropped off her things, as her keys and purse were missing. Investigators checked her phone records and no calls were made, and there was no activity on her credit card. They also read her emails and confirmed there was no suspicious activity there either. There were concert tickets set to take place in a couple of days and a receipt for a new computer that was due to be delivered in Cindy's room. From all accounts, she was happy and expecting to continue her life after she got home from the party. Police didn't believe that she had just ran away. Volunteers searched the nearby woods, but there was no trace of Cindy. A few days later, Cindy was reported missing. An eyewitness came forward to tell police that a woman who looked like Cindy was dragged, kicking and screaming in a car in Philadelphia's Chinatown district nearby, 200 miles away. The witness said that the woman was forced into a vehicle by a man who yelled at the witness to leave them alone. In 2003, bank robber and serial killer Hugo Liske was also brought in as a suspect in Cindy's disappearance. An informant told police that Liske had abducted a woman along with his accomplice, Mike Kukowski, and kept her in a walk-in freezer until she died. Liske admitted to abducting Cindy, but told investigators that Kukowski was the one who killed her and kept the bunny ears she was wearing as a souvenir. Liske told police that he and his accomplice mistook Cindy for a sex worker and kidnapped her. He said that Cindy's body was buried in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania. Police searched Liske's home and found multiple bodies buried in his yard. 12 to be exact, but none of them were Cindy. One of these bodies was Michael Kukowski and his girlfriend, Tammy Fassett. The discovery of Kukowski's body meant that the investigators hit a dead end in the search for Cindy. When Cindy's mother heard the news that her daughter was missing, she traveled from South Korea to aid in the search. She kept her daughter's story alive and generated international coverage for the case. 19 years later, over 20 folders full of information relating to Cindy's disappearance remains untouched, with no clues, no leads, and Cindy still missing.
Our fifth story takes place in Las Vegas, Nevada, one of the most dead-end cases I've ever come across. And my question is, did someone put a hit out on this kid and his family on Halloween?
Tony Bagley was a second grader at Fitzgerald Elementary School. On Halloween night of 1994, he was excited to go trick-or-treating with his family, and so he dressed in a skeleton costume as he went door to door trick-or-treating, walking ahead of his sister, aunt, and mother when he approached the street corner towards the next house. At the same time, at 6:15 p.m., a man wearing a hooded sweatsuit ran into the street and opened fire at the Bagley family. Witnesses told investigators that the gunman then jumped into a waiting car and left the area with the car's headlights off. Tony was shot in the head. His 10-year-old sister, Chanel Bagley, his mother, Lachelle Cooper, and his aunt were all sprayed with gunfire. Chanel required surgery to remove part of her liver. His aunt was shot in the leg and his mother struck in the chest. They were all treated and released. Tony was placed on life support and later died after fighting for his life. At face value, the shooting appeared premeditated, targeting the Bagleys. Northtown, as the city is nicknamed, is known for being gang-infested, although police had stopped short of connecting the crime to gangs. The only description of the shooter was that he was a 5'8" African-American man who was wearing a dark-colored jogging suit. Theories varied, with the most prominent being that another family member, not with the Bagleys that night, had been the intended target. That theory, however, never panned out for investigators. Then Lieutenant Mike Blackwell with the North Las Vegas Police Department said instead that the shooting may have been retaliation for a drug deal gone bad. The case was so frustrating for the police and the family because there were no leads. The police went as far as to call a psychic for help. Tony's mother flew to Los Angeles with a detective to talk to the psychic, said the boy's grandmother, Carolyn Landers. The psychic told them where the gun was, in an abandoned building. Carolyn said it seemed good at first, but the police went to the building. There was no gun. The Bagley family found new hope when Tony's story was broadcast 4 months later on America's Most Wanted, but the publicist for the program said afterwards, "We didn't get any calls." In an odd twist, 3.5 years later, after Tony was shot, his father, Anthony Bagley, in April of 1998, was charged and convicted of an unrelated murder. Today, Anthony Bagley sits in a Nevada state prison serving out 2 consecutive life terms. Anthony never talked to police about whether he knew who shot his son. The 1994 Halloween murder of young Tony Bagley remains unsolved.
For our sixth story, picture this. A lot of people on Halloween Day come to your door for candy. Some of these people even wear masks, and you never get to see their identity. However, what if some of these people took this opportunity to possibly rob or even kill? Well, this is that story.
Fort Dodge, Iowa, October 30th, 1982. Marvin Bradland and his wife Ethel were a normal old couple enjoying their golden years together. They had been married for 40 years and they were still in love as if they had just met. Marvin was a World War II veteran, and he and his wife owned a small carpet cleaning business that sustained them. On the evening of October 30th, 1982, Marvin and Ethel's granddaughter, Teresa Trueblood, had just left from a visit as they were handing out candy to trick-or-treaters. It got to 7:30 and the streets were now dark as trick-or-treaters came to the old couple's door to receive their candy. Suddenly, a knock is heard at the door, and Ethel, thinking it was just some kids, went to answer the door with no hesitation. What she saw was extremely odd. Rather than a small child asking for some candy, she saw an adult with a pillowcase on his head with holes for his eyes. The man then said, and I quote, "Trick or treat, give me all your money or I'll shoot." Ethel, thinking it was just a kid playing a harmless prank, decided to play along. She even thought it could have been her granddaughter who had just left. Ethel reached out and tried to pull the pillowcase, but the person held it down tightly, so she figured she would just play along. She turned around to grab some candy, but the trick-or-treater quickly moved into the doorway behind her. By the time Ethel realized what was going on, there was a gun pointed at her. The man ordered Ethel and Marvin to the basement to take him to their safe. The couple owned a carpet service business, but they weren't considered wealthy enough to be robbed like this. The Bradlands did have a safe in the basement, but no one outside the family even knew about it, and it didn't hold millions by any account. Marvin and Ethel had been shuffled to the kitchen on their way towards the basement, but Marvin had had enough. He refused to go along any further with the prank, still thinking it was someone that they knew and it wasn't a real robbery. Marvin tried to grab the gun, but the man ended up shooting him in his throat. He then took off the pillowcase, probably in disbelief that the situation had got so out of hand. After removing the pillowcase, Ethel was able to get a good look at the man as he fled the scene. Ethel dialed 911, and when officers and paramedics got there, Marvin was still alive, but he was in terrible shape. Upon rushing him to the hospital, Marvin wasn't so lucky, as he died mid-operation. A few months later, his wife Ethel passed away as well. To this very day, no one was ever convicted, nor was the killer ever caught. An unnamed man was taken in as a suspect, but the police had no evidence to prove it was him, and so he was released. Years after, a crime lab took the little DNA from the pillowcase and tried to use it, but it wasn't enough to help the case move forward. However, I believe that one day, justice will be served.
Finally, for our last story, it's not every Halloween that a son takes the life of his own mother. However, on the 28th of October 2014 in the state of Rhode Island, Patricia Ward wasn't so lucky. This is her story.
Patricia Ward was a 66-year-old woman who lived in Rhode Island. She worked at Farm State College as a language professor. She lived a normal life, and her neighbors stated that she mostly kept to herself. The most notable thing about Patricia was the fact that she lived with her 35-year-old son, Derek Ward, who was no stranger to trouble. Derek had been struggling with his mental health for more than 10 years, which is why he lived with his mother, Patricia. Derek had crossed paths with the law several times, like in 2006 when he was arrested due to a gun charge and 100 Valium pills, and received 45 days in jail, and a criminal mischief charge in 2003. In 2013, Derek would lose his grandfather, and this would send him over the edge and decline his mental health. His mother would come to his aid by not only letting him live with her, but also by booking his therapy sessions for him. It should also be noted that Derek was on medication that aided his mental health. Patricia was also very protective when it came to his son, and she was always by her son's side. October 28th, 2014, 7:50 p.m. Derek's neighbor spotted him dragging a corpse in the street and kicking what happened to look like a human head. Due to it being Halloween, she took it as a prank. However, the neighbor was shocked to find out that indeed it was real. Derek had dragged his mother's body onto the street, then kicked her head 20 feet away from her body. Police arrived and found the 66-year-old's body on the street, naked, with only her underwear on. Neighbors would tell police they saw Derek drag the body down the street, and the hunt for Derek began. However, they were too late. Police would get a phone call from workers at the railroad tracks that someone jumped in front of an oncoming train, ending his life. The person would later be identified as Derek Ward.
Thank you so much for watching today's video, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you rock with this content. And I'll be seeing you in the next video. Don't forget to keep trekking, fam.